You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from. I was here first. Move out of the way.
It began as an ordinary morning at the neighborhood grocery store. Bright lights, slow music, the quiet shuffle of carts. But within minutes, that calm would shatter. A woman's anger, fueled by prejudice, turned a simple checkout line into a public spectacle. Shoppers froze as her voice cut through the air, sharp and cruel. Yet among the gasps and stares, one elderly man stood silent, his dignity unshaken. He didn't know it yet, but his calm resistance would soon spark a chain of events that no one in that store would ever forget. The grocery store sat at the corner of a quiet suburban street, a place where most mornings felt routine and predictable. Regulars greeted the cashier by name, kids tugged on their parents' sleeves, and the scent of baked bread drifted through the aisles. Among the familiar faces was Mr. Harris, a retired teacher in his late 70s, known for his calm voice and gentle manners. Every Thursday, he came for the same items: milk, bread, and a small bag of apples. That morning, as he waited patiently in line, a woman a few steps behind grew visibly restless. Her sighs grew louder with each beep of the scanner. Dressed neatly, phone in hand, she tapped her foot, muttering under her breath. It wasn't long before her impatience took shape, first as a glare, then as something colder. When a minor delay at the register caused a brief pause, her frustration erupted. She stepped forward, cutting in front, her voice dripping with irritation. The words that followed carried a weight far heavier than simple annoyance. They weren't about groceries or time, they were about judgment, the kind that reveals itself when someone forgets their humanity. Other shoppers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. And through it all, Mr. Harris simply watched, his eyes steady, his silence speaking louder than any defense. The store's quiet hum fractured as the woman's anger spread through the air like a storm cloud. Shoppers who had been focused on their lists now stood frozen, unsure where to look. A mother pulled her child closer. The cashier hesitated, her trembling hands gripping the scanner as the weight of the moment grew heavier. Mr. Harris remained motionless, his posture straight, his expression calm. Decades of life had taught him the strength of restraint, the quiet dignity of not answering hate with hate. He reached for his groceries with deliberate care, as though each small movement were a declaration of composure. The woman, however, only grew louder. Her frustration twisted into something crueler, feeding on the silence of those around her. What had started as irritation now became a performance, an attempt to assert control in a space where no one had challenged her before. Her voice sharpened, her gestures exaggerated, and though no one spoke, everyone understood what they were witnessing. An employee at the far end of the aisle picked up the phone, quietly signaling for security. A man near the frozen food section began recording, his camera trembling slightly as he tried to steady his hand. The air was thick with discomfort, the kind that makes seconds feel like minutes. Mr. Harris finally turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger there, only a kind of weary sadness, the look of someone who had seen too many moments like this before. That look, calm and unbroken, seemed to ignite something deeper in her, something that stripped away her composure completely. She stepped closer, closing the distance until there was barely space between them. Before anyone could intervene, her outburst crossed the final line, an act that would shift the tone from confrontation to crime. The security guard arrived seconds too late, but the camera had already captured everything. The room that once echoed with whispers now fell into a stunned silence. Within moments, law enforcement was called. Shoppers gathered near the entrance, whispering in disbelief, as the woman who had walked in with entitlement now faced the reality of her own actions. The irony was stark. The very crowd she had once dismissed now stood united, not in words but in quiet disapproval, watching justice move closer with every passing minute. The flashing red and blue lights outside painted the store windows in fractured color, a harsh reminder that a line had been crossed. Officers entered with calm precision, their voices low but firm as they spoke to witnesses and staff. The woman, who had once commanded the room with arrogance, now stood frozen near the checkout counter. Her confidence drained, replaced by disbelief that her actions had drawn real consequences. Mr. Harris sat on a nearby bench, his groceries untouched beside him. The same quiet strength that carried him through the confrontation still held him now. He did not gloat or look away. There was only a quiet sorrow in his eyes, the kind that comes from watching history repeat itself in smaller, everyday moments. As statements were taken, the officer reviewed the video on the bystander's phone. The evidence was clear. Every word, every gesture, every cruel act had been recorded. The crowd that once watched silently now felt the heavy satisfaction of accountability. Justice, long delayed in so many stories like this, seemed tangible for once. When the woman was led outside, her posture had changed. No longer upright and certain, she walked with her head lowered, the weight of her actions pressing down like gravity. The murmurs of the onlookers followed her to the door, but no one shouted, no one celebrated. The lesson had already been delivered, not through punishment, but through the silence of collective shame. Mr. Harris finally rose, thanked the officer with a quiet nod, and began to gather his things. The chaos had subsided, leaving behind the echo of what had just unfolded, a small, ordinary place transformed into a stage for an extraordinary truth. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread quietly through the community. A short video clip from a bystander's phone began circulating online, not for its drama, but for its quiet power. People shared it not to mock or shame, but to remind others of the thin line between ignorance and cruelty, between impatience and prejudice. The woman was fined and ordered to attend community service at a local outreach center, a place that served families not unlike the man she had targeted. For some, the punishment seemed small, but for her, those hours spent listening to the people she once looked down upon became a mirror she could no longer ignore. Mr. Harris returned to the same grocery store the following week. The cashier greeted him softly, her smile tinged with guilt and gratitude. Life resumed its rhythm, carts rolling, doors sliding open, familiar voices filling the aisles. Yet something had shifted. The silence that once followed moments of injustice had turned into awareness. People noticed more, cared more, and spoke up when disrespect surfaced again. For Mr. Harris, the event wasn't about one woman's cruelty, but a reflection of the quiet endurance so many had carried for too long. His calm wasn't weakness. It was strength, the kind that refuses to let hate dictate its tone. As he walked home with his groceries, the sunlight hit the pavement just right, soft, steady, familiar. The world had not changed overnight, but perhaps one small corner of it had taken a step in the right direction. And somewhere in that small act of justice, a reminder remained. Prejudice may speak loudly, but dignity will always speak last.